The Blood of the Arena, Spanish, Sangre y Arena. By Vicente Blasco Ibáñez. Translated by Francis Douglas. Chapter 15. Behind the Scenes. Just at that time Gallardo received several letters from Don Jose and from Carmen. The manager tried to encourage his matador, counseling him to walk straight up to the bulls, thus, "A thrust and thou wilt put him in thy pocket." But underlying his enthusiasm a certain depression might be detected, as if his faith were dwindling and he had begun to doubt that Gallardo was the greatest man in the world. He knew of the discontent and hostility with which the public received him. The last bullfight in Madrid disheartened Don Jose completely. No, Gallardo was not like other swordsmen who went on in spite of public derision, satisfied with earning money. His matador had bullfighter pride and could only show himself in the ring to advantage when received with great enthusiasm. Don Jose pretended to understand what ailed his swordsman. Want of courage? Never. He would suffer death before he would recognize this defect in his hero. It was because he was tired, because he was not yet recovered from his goring. And so, he advised in all his letters, it would be better for thee to retire and rest a season. Afterward thou wilt fight again like thine old self. He offered to arrange everything. A doctor's certificate was enough to certify his temporary weakness, and the manager would settle with the plaza impresarios to arrange the pending contracts by sending a matador from the beginners' ranks, who would substitute Gallardo for a modest sum. They would still make money by this arrangement. Carmen was more vehement in her petitions. He must retire immediately, he must cut his queue. She was more afraid now than in the first years of her married life, when the bullfights and the fearful suspense seemed to her conditions of existence that destroyed her peace of mind. Her heart told her, with that feminine instinct seldom mistaken in its forebodings, that something grave was going to happen. She scarcely slept, she dreaded the night hours, broken as they were by sanguinary visions. She waxed furious at the public in her letters, a crowd of ingrates who forgot what the bullfighter had done when he was himself, evil-minded people who wished to see him die for their diversion, as though she did not exist, as though he had no mother. Juan, Mamita, and I ask it of thee. Retire. Why go on bullfighting? We have enough to live on, and it pains me to have to see thee insulted by people who are beneath thee. And if another accident should happen, heavens, I believe I should go mad. Gallardo remained thoughtful after reading these letters. Retire. What nonsense! Women's notions. They could say this easily on the impulse of affection, but it was impossible. Cut his queue at 30. How his enemies would laugh. He had no right to retire while his members were sound and he could fight. Such an absurd thing had never happened. Money was not all. How about glory? And professional pride? What would the thousands and thousands of enthusiastic partisans who admired him say of him? What answer would they make to the enemies who threw it in their faces that Gallardo had retired through cowardice? Moreover, the matador stopped to consider whether his fortune would permit this solution. He was rich, and yet he was not. His social position was not established. What he possessed was the work of the early years of his married life, when one of his greatest joys consisted in saving, and in surprising Carmen and the Mamita with news of fresh acquisitions. Later he had gone on earning money, maybe in greater quantity, but it was wasted and had disappeared through various leaks in his new existence. He had gambled a great deal and had lived a life of splendor. His gambling had caused him to ask loans of various devotees in the provinces. He was rich, but if he retired, thus losing the income of the corridas, some years 200,000 pesetas, others 300,000, he would have to retrench, after paying his debts, by living like a country gentleman off the product of La Rinconada, practicing economies and overseeing the estate himself, for up to that time the plantation, abandoned to mercenary hands, had produced almost nothing. In former times he would have considered himself extremely wealthy with a small part of what he actually possessed. Now he seemed almost a poor man if he gave up bullfighting. He would have to forego the Havana cigars which he distributed prodigally, and the high-priced Andalusian wines. He would have to curtail the impulses of a grand senor and no longer shout in cafes and taverns. It's all paid for, with the generous impulse of a man accustomed to defy death, which led him to conduct his life with mad extravagance. He would have to dismiss the troop of parasites and flatterers that swarmed around him, making him laugh with their whining petitions, and when a smart woman of equivocal class came to him, if any would come, after he had retired, he could no longer make her turn pale with emotion by putting into her ears hoops of gold and pearls, nor could he amuse himself by spotting her rich Chinese shawl with wine to surprise her afterwards with a finer one. So had he lived, and so must he continue to live. He was a bullfighter of the good old times, such as the people represent a matador of bulls to be, liberal, proud, a reveler in scandalous extravagances and quick to succor the unfortunate with princely alms whenever they touched his rude sentiments. Gallardo jested at many of his companions, bullfighters of a new kind, vulgar members of the guild of the industry of killing bulls, who journeyed from plaza to plaza like commercial travelers, and were careful and mean in all their expenditures. Some of them, who were almost boys, carried in their pocket an account book of income and expenses, marking down even the 5 centimes for a glass of water at a station. They only mingled with the rich to accept their attentions, and it never occurred to them to treat anybody. Others boiled great pots of coffee at home when the traveling season came on and carried the black liquid with them in bottles, having it reheated, to avoid this expense in hotels. The members of certain quadrillas endured hunger and growled in public about the avarice of their maestros. Gallardo was not tired of his life of splendor, and they wanted him to renounce it. Moreover, he thought of the necessities of his own house, where all were accustomed to an easy existence, the full and unembarrassed life of a family which does not count money or worry about its coming in, seeing it drip ceaselessly as from a faucet. Besides his wife and mother, he had taken upon himself another family, his sister, his chattering brother-in-law, as idle as though his relationship to a celebrated man gave him the right to vagrancy, and all the troop of little nephews who were growing up and becoming constantly more expensive. He would have to call to an order of economy and parsimony all these people accustomed to live at his cost in merry and open-handed carelessness. And everybody, even poor Garbato, would have to go to the plantation, to parch in the sun and become brutish as rustics. Poor Mamita could no longer gladden her last days with pious generosity, dispensing money among the needy women in the ward, shrinking like a bashful girl when her son pretended to be angry at finding she had nothing left of the 100 euros he had given her 2 weeks before. Carmen naturally would try to cut down expenses, sacrificing herself first, depriving her existence of many frivolities that made it bright. Curse it! All this meant the degradation of his family, on his account. Gallardo felt ashamed that such a thing might happen. It would be a crime to deprive them after having accustomed them to luxury. And what must he do to avoid it? Simply get closer to the bulls, to go on fighting as in former times. He would get closer. He answered his manager's and Carmen's letters with brief and labored lines that revealed his firm intention. Retire? Never. He was resolved to be the same as ever. He swore it to Don Jose. He would follow his advice. Thus, a thrust, and the beast in his pocket. His courage rose, and he felt equal to taking care of all the bulls in the universe, no matter how big they might be. He was gay toward his wife, although his pride was rather hurt because she doubted his strength. She should hear news after the next corrida. He meant to astonish the public to shame it for its injustice. If the bulls were good, he would be like the very Roger de Flor himself. Good bulls. This was Galado's worry. It used to be one of his vanities that he never gave them a thought, and he never went to see them in the plaza before the corrida. I kill everything they let out to me, he used to say arrogantly. And he beheld the bulls for the first time when he saw them enter the ring. Now he wished to examine them, to choose them, to prepare for success by a careful study of their condition. The weather had cleared, the sun shone. The following day the second bullfight was to take place. In the afternoon Gallardo went alone to the plaza. The amphitheatre of red brick, with its Moorish windows, stood by itself at the base of green hills. In the background of this broad and monotonous landscape something resembling a distant flock of sheep shone white on the slope of a hill. It was a cemetery. Seeing the bullfighter in the vicinity of the plaza, some slovenly individuals, parasites of the ring, vagabonds who slept in the stables through charity, living at the cost of devotees and on the leavings of patrons of the nearby taverns, approached him. Some of them had come from Andalusia with a shipment of bulls and hung about in the vicinity of the plaza. Gallardo distributed some coins among these beggars, who followed him cap in hand, and entered the ring through the door of the caballerizas. In the corral he saw a group of devotees watching the picadors testing horses. Portage, with great cowboy spurs on his heels, was grasping a spear, preparing to mount. Those in charge of the stables escorted the manager of the horses, an obese man in a great Andalusian hat, slow of speech, who responded calmly to the insulting and abusive wrangling of the picadors. The wise monkeys, with arms bared, were pulling the hacks by the bridle reins for the riders to try them. For several days they had been riding and training these miserable horses which still bore on their flanks the red gashes of the spurs. They brought them out to trot over the clearings adjacent to the plaza, making them acquire an artificial energy with the iron on their heels and obliging them to make turns to accustom them to running in the ring. They came back to the plaza with their sides dyed with blood, and before entering the stables they received a baptism of several bucketfuls of water. Near the trough not far away the water standing between the stones was dark red, like spilled wine. The horses destined for the bullfight the following day were almost dragged out of the stables to be examined and passed upon by the picadors. These worn-out remnants of wretched horseflesh advanced, with tremulous flanks drooping with old age and sickness, a reproach to human ingratitude so forgetful of past service. Some were mere skeletons with sharp protruding ribs that seemed about to break through their hairy hide. Others walked proudly, stamping their strong hoofs, their coats shining and their eyes bright, beautiful animals that it was hard to imagine among outcasts destined to death, magnificent beasts that seemed to have been recently unharnessed from a luxurious carriage. These were the most dreaded, for they were horses afflicted with vertigo and other maladies, and behind these specimens of misery and infirmity, rang the sad hoofbeats of steeds past work, mill and factory horses, farm horses, public cab nags, all dulled by years of pulling the plough or the cart, unhappy pariahs who were going to be exploited until the last instant, forced to provide diversion to men with their pawing and springing when the bull's horns gored their shrinking bodies. To mount this miserable horse herd, tremulous with madness or ready to drop with misery, as much courage was needed as to stand before the bull. Heavy Moorish saddles with high pommel, yellow seat, and cowboy stirrups were thrown upon them, and as they received this weight their legs almost gave way. Portage wore a haughty mien in his discussions with the overseer of the horses, speaking for himself and for his comrades, making even the wise monkeys laugh with his gypsy-like maledictions. Let the other picadors leave it to him to come to an understanding with the horse traders. Nobody knew better than he how to make these people stand around. A servant approached him, dragging after him a dejected hack with long hair and ribs in painful relief. "What art thou bringing there?" said Pottage, facing the man. "That can't be received. That's an animal no man alive could mount. Take it to thy mother." The phlegmatic contractor answered with grave calmness. If Pottage dared not mount him, it was because the picaros nowadays were afraid of everything. With a horse like this, kind and gentle, Senor Calderon, Trigo, or any of the good old-time horsemen could have fought bulls 2 consecutive afternoons without getting a fall and without the animal receiving a scratch. But now there was much fear and very little shame. The picador and the contractor insulted one another with friendly calmness, for among them abusive language lost significance from force of habit. "What thou art," answered Pottage, "is a freshie, a bigger thief than Jose Maria the early bird. Get out, and let thy bald-headed grandmother that rode on a broom every Saturday at the stroke of 12 get on that raw-boned, hard-gated beast." Those present laughed, and the contractor merely shrugged his shoulders. "But what's the matter with that horse?" he said coolly. "Look at him, thou evil soul. Better is he than others that have glandis, or get dizzy, and that have thrown thee off over their ears before thou wast even near the bull. He is sounder than an apple, for he has been 28 years in a gas factory doing his duty like a decent person, without ever being found fault with. And now along comest thou, thou street crier, abusing him with thy buts and thy fault-finding, as if he were a bad Christian. But I don't want him. Get out. Keep him." The contractor slowly approached Pottage, and with the ease of a man expert in these transactions, whispered in his ear. The picador, pretending to be offended, finally walked up to the hack. He shouldn't miss the sale on his account. He didn't want to be taken for an intractable man, capable of injuring a comrade. Putting a foot in the stirrup, he swung the weight of his body upon the poor horse. Then, holding the spear under his arm, he thrust it into a great post embedded in the wall, spurring it several times with tremendous force, as if he had a stout bull at the end of his lance. The poor hack trembled and bent his legs under these shocks. "He don't turn badly," said Pottage with conciliating tone. "The penco is better than I thought. He's got a good mouth, good legs. Thou hast one. Let him be kept." The picador dismounted, disposed to accept anything the contractor offered him after his mysterious aside. Gallardo left the group of devotees who had laughingly witnessed this performance. A porter of the plaza went with him to where the bulls were kept. He passed through a little door entering the corrals. A rubble wall that reached the height of a man's neck surrounded the corral on 3 sides, strengthened by heavy posts united to the little upper balcony. Passages so narrow that a man could only go through them sidewise opened at certain distances. 8 bulls were in the spacious corral, some lying down, others standing with lowered heads sniffing at the pile of hay before them. The bullfighter walked the length of these galleries examining the animals. At times he would come outside the barricade, his body looming up through the narrow openings. He waved his arms, giving savage whoops of challenge that stirred the bulls out of their immobility. Some sprang nervously, attacking with lowered head this man who came to disturb the peace of their enclosure. Others stood firm on their legs, waiting with raised heads and threatening mien for the rash being to approach them. Gallardo, who quickly hid himself again behind the barricades, examined the appearance and character of the wild beasts, without deciding which two he desired to choose. The plaza overseer was near him, a big athletic man, with leggings and spurs, dressed in coarse cloth and wearing a broad hat held by a chin strap. They had nicknamed him Young Wolf. He was a rough rider who spent the greater part of the year in the open country, coming to Madrid like a savage, with no curiosity to see its streets nor desire to pass beyond the vicinity of the plaza. To his mind, the capital of Spain was a ring with clearings and wastelands in its environs, and beyond these a mysterious series of houses with which he had felt no desire to become acquainted. The most important establishment in Madrid was, in his opinion, Galena's Tavern, situated near the plaza, a pleasant realm of joy, an enchanting palace where he supped and ate at the manager's cost, before returning to the pastures mounted on his steed, with his dark blanket over the pommel, his saddle bags on the croup, and his spear over his shoulder. He rejoiced in terrifying the servants of the tavern with his friendly greetings, terrible handclasps that made the bones crack and drew shrieks of terror. He smiled, proud of his strength and proud to be called brute, and seated himself before his meal, a plate the size of a dishpan, full of meat and potatoes, besides a jug of wine. He tended the bulls acquired by the manager, sometimes in the pasture grounds of Munoza, or, when the heat was excessive, in the meadows among the Guadaramas. He brought them to the enclosure 2 days before the corrida, at midnight, crossing the Arroyo Ebronigel, at the outskirts of Madrid, accompanied by horsemen and cowboys. He was in despair when bad weather prevented the bullfight and the herd had to remain in the plaza, and he could not return immediately to the tranquil solitudes where he pastured the other bulls. Slow of speech, dull of thought, this centaur who smelled of hide and hay expressed himself with warmth when he talked of his pastoral life herding wild beasts. The sky of Madrid seemed to him narrow and to have fewer stars. He described with picturesque loquacity the nights in the pasture with his bulls sleeping in the diffused light of the firmament and in the dense silence broken only by the mysterious noises from the thickets. The mountain snakes sang with a strange voice in this stillness. They sang, "Si, Senor." No one cared to dispute young Wolf, he had heard it 1,000 times, and to doubt this were to call him a liar, exposing oneself to feel the weight of his heavy hands. And as the reptiles sang, so the bulls talked, only that he had not managed to penetrate all the mysteries of their tongue. They were Christians although they walked on 4 legs and had horns. It was a fine sight to see them awaken when the morning light appeared. They sprang up joyfully like children, they played, pretending to attack, locking horns, they tried to ride one another with a noisy joy, as if they greeted the presence of the sun which is God's glory. Then he told of his long excursions through the Guadaramas, following the course of the stream of liquid snow that flowed down from the mountain peaks, like transparent crystal, feeding the rivers and the meadows with their herbage dotted with tiny flowers, of the flapping of the wings of the birds that came and perched on the sleeping bull's horns, of the wolves that howled through the night, ever far away, very far away, as if frightened by the procession of primeval beasts that followed the leader's bell to dispute with them the wild solitude. Let them not talk to him of Madrid, where the people were suffocated. The only acceptable things in this forest of houses were Galena's wine and his savory stews. Young Wolf talked to the swordsman and helped him by his advice to choose 2 animals. The overseer showed neither respect nor wonder in the presence of this famous man, so admired by the people. The bullherder almost hated the bullfighter. Kill one of those noble animals, with all kinds of deceptions. A braver man was he who lived among them, passing before their horns in the solitude, without other defense than his arm, and with no applause whatever. As Gallardo left the corral, another joined the group, greeting the maestro with great respect. He was an old man, charged with the cleanliness of the plaza. He had spent many years in this employment and had known all the famous bullfighters of his time. He went poorly clad, but frequently women's rings glistened on his fingers, and he blew his nose upon a dainty lace-edged linen handkerchief, which he drew out of the depths of his blouse. Alone during the week he swept the immense ring, the tiers of seats and the boxes, without complaint as to the magnitude of this task. Whenever the manager found fault and threatened to punish him by opening the door to the vagabonds who idled around outside the plaza, the poor man in desperation promised to mend, so that this unwelcome eruption of scavengers might not cheat him of his spoil. At the most, he admitted half a dozen rogues, bullfight apprentices, who were faithful to him in exchange for his permitting them on festal days to see the corridor from the dog's box, a door with a grill situated near the bullpens, through which the wounded combatants were carried out. These assistants, clutching the iron bars, witnessed the corridor, struggling and fighting like monkeys in a cage to occupy the front row. The old man distributed them skillfully during the week as the cleaning of the plaza progressed. The youngsters worked in the seats in the sun occupied by the poor and dirty public, which leaves in its wake a scrap heap of orange skins, papers, and cigar stubs. "Look out for the tobacco," he ordered his troop. "Anyone that holds on to a single cigar stub won't see the bullfight Sunday." He patiently cleaned the shady side, bending over like a treasure seeker in the mystery of the boxes to put the findings in his pockets: ladies' fans, rings, handkerchiefs, lost coins, all that an invasion of 14,000 persons leaves in its wake. He heaped up the smokers' leavings, mincing the stubs and selling them for pulverized tobacco after exposing them to the sun. The valuables were for a pawnbrokeress who bought these spoils of a public forgetful or overcome by emotion. Gallardo answered the old man's pleasant greetings by giving him a cigar, and he took leave of young Wolf. It was agreed with the overseer that he should shut up the two chosen bulls for him. The other swordsmen would not protest. They were boys in good luck, in the flower of their youthful bravery, who killed whatever was put before them. Going out into the courtyard again where the horse testing was going on, Gallardo saw a man move away from the group of spectators. He was tall, spare, and of a coppery complexion, dressed like a bullfighter. Beneath his black hat, locks of greyish hair fell over his ears, and he was wrinkled around the mouth. "Pescadero, how art thou?" said Gallardo, pressing his hand with sincere effusion. He was an old-time swordsman who had had hours of glory in his youth, but whose name few remembered. Other matadors coming after had obscured his poor fame, and Pescadero, after fighting bulls in America and suffering various wounds, had retired with a small capital of savings. Gallardo knew that he was the owner of a tavern in the vicinity of the ring where he vegetated far from the devotees and bullfighters' trade. He did not expect to see him in the plaza, but Pescadero said with a melancholy expression, "What brings me here?" "Devotion to the game. I seldom come to the bullfights, but affairs of the trade still attract me, and I come in a neighborly fashion to see these things. Now I am nothing but a tavern keeper." Gallardo, contemplating his forlorn appearance, thought of the Pescadero he had known in his youth, one of his most admired heroes, arrogant, favored by the women, a notable figure in Campana Street when he went to Seville, with his velvet hat, his wine-colored jacket, and his silken girdle, leaning on a gold-headed cane. And thus would he become common and forgotten if he retired from bullfighting. They discussed professional matters a long time. Pescadero, like all old men embittered by bad luck, was a pessimist. There were no good bullfighters anymore. Only Gallardo and a few others killed bulls in classic style. Even the beasts seemed less powerful. And after these lamentations he insisted on his friend accompanying him to his house. Since they had met, and the matador had nothing to do, he must visit his establishment. Gallardo smiled, and asked about the school of tauromachy established by Pescadero near his tavern. "What wouldst thou, son?" said the latter apologetically. "One has to help oneself, and the school yields more than all the customers of the tavern. Very good people come, young gentlemen who want to learn so as to shine in bullock fights, foreigners that grow enthusiastic at the bullfights and get a crazy notion to become bullfighters in their old age. I have one taking a lesson now. He comes every afternoon. Thou shalt see." After taking a glass of wine at the tavern, they crossed the street and entered a place surrounded by a high wall. On the boards nailed together, that served as a door, was posted a great bill which announced, "School of Tauromachy." They entered. The first thing that claimed Galado's attention was the bull, an animal made of wood and rushes, mounted on wheels, with a tail of tow, head of braided straw, a section of cork in place of a neck, and a pair of genuine and enormous horns which inspired the pupils with terror. A bare-breasted youth, wearing a cap and two hanks of hair over his ears, communicated activity to the beast by pushing it when the students stood before it cape in hand. In the center of the enclosure a round, corpulent old man with a red face stood in his shirt sleeves holding an armful of banderillas. Near the wall, slouching in one chair and resting her arms on another, was a lady of about the same age and not less voluminous, wearing a beflowered hat. Her florid face, with spots as yellow as chaff, dilated with enthusiasm every time her companion performed a good feat. The roses on her hat, and her false curls of a ridiculous blonde hue, shook with laughter as she applauded. Standing in the doorway, Pescadero explained these people to Gallardo. They must be French, or natives of some other foreign country. He was not sure where they were from, nor did it matter to him. They were a married couple who traveled about the world and seemed to have lived everywhere. He had had 1,000 trades, to judge from his tales: miner in Africa, colonist in distant isles, hunter of horses with a lasso in the solitudes of America. Now he wished to fight bulls, to earn money as did the Spaniards, and he attended the school every afternoon, with the determination of a stubborn child, paying generously for his lessons. Imagine it, a bullfighter with that shape and well past 50 years of age. When the pupil saw the two men enter, he lowered his arms laden with banderillas, and the lady arranged her skirt and flowery hat. "Oh, cher maître. Good afternoon, monsieur." "Greetings, madam," said the master, raising his hand to his hat. "Let us see, monsieur, how the lesson is getting on. You know what I have told you. Firm on your ground, you stir up the beast, you let him come on, and when you have him beside you, aim, and put the barbs in his neck. You don't have to worry yourself about anything, the bull will do everything for you. Attention! Are we ready?" The master moved away, and the pupil faced the terrible bull, or rather the gamin who was behind it, his hands on its hind quarters to push it. "Eh! Come on, Morito!" Pescadero gave a frightful bellow to cause the animal to charge, exciting, with yells and with furious stamping on the ground, this animal with entrails of air and rushes, and a head of straw. Morito charged like a wild beast, with great clatter of wheels, bobbing his head up and down as he moved, the page who pushed him bringing up the rear. Never could bull of famous breed compare in intelligence with this Morito, immortal beast, stuck full of barbs and sword thrusts thousands of times, suffering no other wounds than such insignificant ones as a carpenter cures. He seemed as wise as man. On drawing near the pupil, he changed his course so as not to touch him with his horns, moving away with the barbs lodged in his cork neck. An ovation greeted this heroic feat, the banderillero remaining firm in his place, arranging the suspenders of his trousers and the cuffs of his shirt. "Masterful, monsieur," shouted Pescadero. "That pair is first class." The foreigner, moved by the professor's applause, responded with modesty, beating his breast. "Me got the most important. Courage, mucho courage." Then, to celebrate his deed, he turned to Morito's page, who seemed to lick his lips in anticipation of the order. "Let a bottle of wine be fetched." 3 empty ones lay on the ground near the lady, who was constantly growing more purple in the face, wriggling in her clothing, greeting her companions' Tauromachic exploits with great shouts of laughter. On learning that he who had just arrived with the teacher was the famous Gallardo, and on recognizing his countenance so often admired by her in the newspapers and on matchboxes, the foreign woman lost color and her eyes grew tender. Oh, cher maitre. She smiled at him, she rubbed against him, desiring to fall into his arms with all the weight of her voluminous and flabby person. Glasses were clinked to the glory of the new bullfighter. Even Morito took part in the feast, the steward who acted as nurse drinking in his name. Before 2 months, Monsieur, said Pescadero, with his Andalusian gravity, you will be sticking banderillas in the Plaza of Madrid like the very god himself, and you will have all the applause, all the money, and all the women, with your lady's permission. The lady, without ceasing to gaze upon Gallardo with tender eyes, was moved with joy, and a noisy laugh shook her waves of fat. Pescadero accompanied Gallardo down the street. Adios, Juan, he said gravely. Maybe we'll see each other in the plaza tomorrow. Thou sayest what I have come to earn my bread by these frauds and clown tricks. Gallardo walked away, thoughtful. Oh! That man whom he had seen throw money around in his good times with the arrogance of a prince, sure of his future. He had lost his savings in bad speculations. A bullfighter's life was not one in which to learn the management of a fortune. And yet they proposed that he retire from his profession. Never. He must get close to the bulls. Chapter 16. The greatest man in the world. During the whole night one dominant thought floated over the dark lake of Gallardo's dreams. He must get close. And the next morning the resolution was firmly rooted in his mind. He would get close, and astound the public by his brave deeds. Such was his mettle that he went to the plaza free from the superstitious fears of former times. He felt the certainty of triumph, the presentiment of his glorious afternoons. The corrida was unlucky from the start. The first bull came in fighting, furiously attacking the men on horseback. In an instant he had thrown the 3 picados who awaited him lance in socket, and 2 of the hacks lay dying, streams of dark blood gushing from their perforated chests. The other horse ran across the plaza, mad with pain and surprise. The bull, attracted by this race, ran after him, and lowering his powerful head beneath his belly, raised him on his horns and threw him on the ground, venting his rage on the poor broken and punctured hulk. As the wild beast left it kicking and dying, a Mono Sabio approached to finish it, burying his dagger blade in the crown of his head. The wretched hack showed the fury of a lion in his death struggles and bit the man, who gave a scream and shook his bleeding right hand, pressing on the dagger until the horse ceased kicking and lay with rigid limbs. Other plaza employees came running from all directions with great baskets of sand to throw in heaps over the pools of blood and the dead bodies of the horses. The public was on its feet, gesticulating and vociferating. It was filled with enthusiasm by the bull's fierceness and protested because there was not a picador in the ring, shouting in chorus, "Horses, horses!" Everybody knew they would come in immediately, but it infuriated them to have an interval pass without new carnage. The bull stood alone in the center of the ring, proud and billowing, raising his blood-stained horns, the ribbons of the emblem on his lacerated neck fluttering in the breeze. New horsemen appeared, and the repugnant spectacle was repeated. The picador had barely approached with spear held in advance, reining his horse to one side so that the bandaged eye would prevent his seeing the bull, when the shock and fall were instantaneous. Javelins broke with the cracking sound of dry wood, the gored horse was raised on the powerful horns, blood spouted, bits of hide and flesh fell after the shock of mortal combat, the picador rolled along the sand like a yellow-legged puppet and was immediately covered by the attendants' capes. The public hailed the riders' noisy falls with shouting and laughter. The arena resounded with the shock of their heavy bodies and their iron-covered legs. Some fell backwards like stuffed sacks, and their heads, as they encountered the boards of the barricade, awoke a dismal echo. "He'll never get up again," shouted the people. "He must have busted his melon." But he did get up again. He extended his arms, scratched his head, recovered his heavy beaver hat lost in the fall, and remounted the same horse which the Monos Sabios forced upon its feet with pushes and blows. The gay horseman urged his steed into a trot, and astride the agonized wreck rode to meet the wild beast again. "Good for you," he shouted, throwing his hat at a group of friends. No sooner did he stand before the bull, thrusting his lance into the neck, than man and horse rose on high, the two immediately falling apart from the violence of the shock, and rolling in different directions. Again, before the bull attacked, the Monos Sabios and some of the audience warned the horseman, "Dismount." But before his rigid legs would allow him to do so, the horse fell flat, instantly dead, and the picador was hurled over his ears, his head striking the arena with a resounding thud. The bull's horns never managed to gore the riders, but those lying on the ground apparently lifeless were carried by the peons to the infirmary to have their broken bones set or to be resuscitated from death-like unconsciousness. Gallardo, eager to attract the sympathy of the audience, hurried from place to place. He received great applause at one time for pulling a bull's tail to save a picador who lay on the ground at the point of being gored. While the banderillas were being placed, Gallardo leaned against the barrier and gazed along the boxes. Dona Sol must be in one of them. At last he saw her, but without her white mantle, without anything to remind him of that Sevillian lady dressed like one of Goya's mages. One might think her, with her blonde hair and her novel and elegant hat, one of those foreign women attending a bullfight for the first time. At her side was the friend, that man of whom she talked with admiration and to whom she was showing the interesting features of the country. Ah, Dona Sol! Soon she should see of what metal was the brave youth she had abandoned. She would have to applaud him in the presence of the hated stranger. She would be transported and moved against her will by the enthusiasm of the audience. When the moment arrived for Gallardo to kill his first bull, the second on the program, the public received him kindly as if it had forgotten its anger at the previous bullfight. The 2 weeks of suspension on account of the rain seemed to have produced great tolerance in the multitude. They were willing to find everything acceptable in a corrida so long awaited. Besides, the fierceness of the bulls and the great mortality of horses had put the public in a good humor. Gallardo strode up to the bull, his head uncovered after his salutation, with the muleta held before him, and swinging his sword like a cane. Behind him, although at a prudent distance, followed National and another bullfighter. A few voices from the rows of seats protested. How many acolytes! It resembled a parish priest going to a funeral. "Stand aside, everybody," shouted Gallardo. The two peons paused, because he said it as if he meant it, with an accent that left no room for doubt. He strode ahead until near the wild beast, and there he unrolled his muleta, making a few passes more like those of his old times, until he thrust the rag near the drivelling muzzle. "A good play! Hurrah!" A murmur of satisfaction ran along the tiers of seats. The bullfighter of Seville had redeemed his name. He had bullfighter pride. He was going to do some of his own feats, as in his better days. His pas de muleta were accompanied by noisy exclamations of enthusiasm, while his partisans became reanimated and rebuked their enemies. What did they think of that? Gallardo was careless sometimes. They knew that, but any afternoon when he wished. That was one of the good afternoons. When he saw the bull standing with motionless forefeet, the public itself fired him with its advice. "Now, thrust." Gallardo threw himself against the wild beast with the sword presented, but rapidly moved away from the danger of the horns. Applause arose, but it was short. A threatening murmur cut by strident hisses followed. The enthusiasts ceased looking at the bull to face the rest of the public with indignation. What injustice! What lack of knowledge! He had started in at the killing well enough. But the enemies pointed to the bull derisively persisting in their protests, and the whole plaza joined in a deafening explosion of hisses. The sword had penetrated obliquely, passing through the bull's body, its point appearing through one side, near his foreleg. The people gesticulated and waved their arms with roars of indignation. What a scandal! Even a bad bullock fighter would not make such a stroke as that. The animal, with the hilt of the sword in his neck, and the point protruding through the joint of his foreleg, began to limp, his enormous mass quivering with the movement of his unsteady tread. This spectacle seemed to move the audience with generous indignation. Poor bull! So good, so noble! Some leaned forward, ragging with fury, as if they would throw themselves head foremost into the ring. Thief, son of a thief! To thus martyrize an animal that was better than he! And all shouted with impetuous sympathy for the animal's suffering, as if they had not paid their money to witness his death. Gallardo, astounded at his act, bowed his head beneath the storm of insults and threats. Cursed be the luck! He had started in to kill just as in his better epoch, dominating the nervous feeling that forced him to turn away his face as if he could not bear the sight of the wild beast that charged him. But desire to avoid danger, to immediately escape from between the horns, had caused him to lose his luck again with that stupid and scandalous thrust. The people on the tiers of seats stirred restlessly with the fervor of numerous disputes. He doesn't understand. He turns away his face. He has made a fool of himself. Gallardo's partisans excused their idol, but with less fervency. That might happen to anybody. It is a misfortune. The important thing is to start and to kill with spirit as he does. The bull, after running and limping with painful steps which made the crowd howl with indignation, stood motionless, so as not to prolong his martyrdom. Gallardo grasped another sword, walked up and faced the bull. The public divined his task. He must finish him by pricking him in the base of the brain, the only thing he could do after his crime. He held the point of the sword between the two horns, while with the other hand he shook the muleta so that the animal, attracted by the rag, would lower his head to the ground. He pressed on the sword, and the bull, feeling himself wounded, tossed his head throwing out the instrument. "One!" shouted the multitude with mocking unanimity. The matador repeated his play and again drove in the sword, making the wild beast shudder. "Two!" they sang mockingly from the bleachers. He tried again to touch the vulnerable spot with no other result than a bellow of pain from the animal, tortured by this martyrdom. 3. Hisses and shouts of protest were united to this ironic chorus on the part of the public. When was that fool going to get through? Finally he succeeded in touching with the point of his sword the beginning of the spinal cord, the center of life, and the bull fell instantly, lying on his side with rigid legs. The swordsman wiped the sweat off his brow and began his return to the president's box with slow step, breathing heavily. At last he was free of that animal. He had thought he would never finish. The public received him with sarcasms as he passed, or with disdainful silence. None applauded. He saluted the president in the midst of general indifference, and took refuge behind the barrier, like a pupil shamed by his faults. While Garbato offered him a glass of water, the matador looked at the boxes, meeting the eyes of Dona Sol which had followed him into his retreat. What must that woman think of him? How she and her friend would laugh on seeing him insulted by the public. What a damnable idea of that lady to come to the bullfight. He remained between barriers, avoiding all fatigue until the next bull he was to kill should be let out. His wounded leg pained him on account of his having run so much. He was no longer himself, he knew it now. His arrogance and his resolve to get closer resulted in nothing. His legs were no longer swift and sure as in former times, nor had his right arm that daring that made him extend it fearlessly, eager to reach the bull's neck without delay. Now it bent disobedient to his will, with the blind instinct of certain animals that shrink and hide their faces, thinking thus to avoid danger. His old-time superstitions suddenly awoke, terrifying and obsessing him. I feel that something is going to happen, thought Gallardo. My heart tells me that the fifth bull will catch me. He'll catch me, there is no escape. However, when the fifth bull came out, the first thing he met was Gallardo's cape. What an animal! He seemed different from the one he had chosen in the corral the day before. Surely they had changed the order in regard to letting out the bulls. Fear kept ringing in the bullfighter's ears. Bad sign. He'll catch me, I'll go out of the ring today foot foremost. In spite of this, he kept on fighting the wild beast and drawing it away from picadors in danger. At first his feats were received in silence. Then the public, softening, applauded him mildly. When it came time for the death stroke and Gallardo squared himself before the wild beast, everyone seemed to divine the confusion of his mind. He moved as if disconcerted. The bull no sooner tossed his head than, taking the attitude for an advance, he stepped back, receding by great springs, while the public greeted these attempts at flight with a chorus of jests. Ouch! Ouch! He'll catch thee! Suddenly, as if he wished to end it by any means, he threw himself upon the animal with the sword, but obliquely, so as to escape from danger as soon as possible. An explosion of hisses and voices. The sword was embedded but a few inches, and after vibrating in the wild beast's neck, was shaken out and hurled far away. Gallardo took his sword again and approached the bull. He squared himself to go in to kill, and the wild beast charged at the same instant. He longed to flee, but his legs no longer had the agility of other times. He was struck and rolled over from the shock. Aid came, and Gallardo arose covered with dirt, with a great rent in the seat of his trousers through which his white underclothing escaped, and minus a slipper and the mona which adorned his queue. The arrogant youth whom the public had so much admired for his elegance, presented a pitiful and absurd appearance with his clothes awry, his hair disarranged, his colleta fallen and undone like a limp tail. Several capes were mercifully extended around him to aid and shield him. The other bullfighters, with generous comradeship, even prepared the bull so that he could finish with it quickly. But Gallardo seemed blind and deaf. No sooner did he see the animal than he stepped back at his lightest charges, as if the recent upsetting had maddened him with fear. He did not understand what his comrades said to him, but, with his face intensely pale, and frowning as though to concentrate his mind, he stammered, not knowing what he said. Stand aside, everybody. Leave me alone. Meanwhile fear kept singing through his brain, today thou diest. Today is thy last goring. The public divined the swordsman's thought from his confused movements. The bull makes him sick. He has become afraid. Even Gallardo's most fervent partisans kept silent through shame, unable to explain this occurrence never before seen. The people seemed to revel in his terror, with the undaunted courage of those who are in a place of safety. Others, thinking of their money, shouted against this man who let himself be ruled by the instinct of self-preservation, defrauding them of their joy. A robbery. While people insulted the swordsman, expressing doubt as to his sex. Odium had brought to light and spread abroad, after many years of adulation, certain memories of the bullfighter's youth, forgotten even by himself. They recalled his nocturnal life with the vagabonds on the Alameda of Hercules. They laughed at his torn breeches and at the white clothing that escaped through the rent. If thou couldst see thyself, shouted shrill voices, with feminine accent. Gallardo, protected by his companions' capes, took advantage of all the bull's distractions to wound him with his sword, deaf to the mocking of the public. He dealt thrusts that the animal barely felt. His terror at being caught lengthened his arm and caused him to stand at a distance, wounding only with the point of the sword. Some blades were scarcely embedded in the flesh and fell, others remained lodged in bone but were uncovered in their greater length, vibrating with the movements of the bull which walked with lowered head, following the contour of the wall, bellowing as if with weariness at the useless torment. The swordsman followed him, muleta in hand, eager to finish him, yet fearful of exposing himself, and behind came the whole troop of assistants moving their capes as if they wished to induce the animal by the waving of their rags to bend his legs and lie down. The bull's journey about the ring close to the barrier, his muzzle driveling, his neck bristling with swords, provoked an explosion of mockery and insult. "It is the Via Dolorosa," they said. Others compared the animal to a cushion full of pins. "Thief! Miserable bullpincher!" Some, more vile, persisted in their insults to Galado's sex, changing his name. "Jonita, don't get lost." A long time passed and a part of the public, wishing to discharge its fury against something higher than the bullfighter, turned towards the presidential box. Senor President. How long was this scandal going to last? The president made a sign that quieted the protestants and gave an order. A minor official with his plumed shovel hat and floating cape was seen to run along behind the barrier until he stood near the bull. There, turning to Galado, he held out his hand, with his index finger raised. The public applauded. It was the first notice. If the bull was not killed before the third, he would be returned to the corral, leaving the swordsman under the stain of the greatest dishonor. Galado, as if awakening from his dream, terrified at this threat, raised his sword and threw himself upon the bull. Another thrust that barely penetrated the bull's body. The swordsman let fall his arms in dejection. Surely the beast was immortal. Sword thrusts made no impression on him. It seemed as if he would never fall. The inefficiency of the last stroke infuriated the public. Every one rose to his feet. The hisses were deafening, obliging the women to cover their ears. Many waved their arms, bending forward, as if they wished to hurl themselves into the plaza. Oranges, bread crusts, seat cushions, flew into the ring like swift projectiles aimed at the matador. Stentorian voices rose from the seats in the sun, roars like those of a steam siren, which it seemed incredible should be produced by the human throat. From time to time a deafening clamor of bells pealed forth with furious strokes. A derisive chorus near the bull pens chanted the gori gori of the dead. Many turned towards the president. When would the second notice be given? Galado wiped off the sweat with his handkerchief, gazing in all directions as if surprised at the injustice of the public, and making the bull responsible for all that occurred. At that moment his eyes rested on Dona Sol's box. She turned her back so as not to see the ring. Perhaps she felt pity for him, perhaps she was ashamed of her condescensions in the past. Again he threw himself upon the animal to kill, but few could see what he did, for he was hidden by the open capes hung continually about him. The bull fell, a stream of blood gushing out of his mouth. At last, the public became less restless, ceasing to gesticulate, but the shouts and hisses continued. The beast was finished by the puntillero, the swords were drawn out, he was harnessed by the head to a team of mules and dragged from the ring, leaving a broad belt of smooth earth and pools of blood which the attendants obliterated with the rake and baskets of sand. Galado hid himself between barriers, fleeing from the insulting protests which his presence raised. There he remained, tired and panting for breath, with his leg aching, but in the midst of his dejection feeling satisfaction at being free from danger. He had not died on the wild beast's horns, but he owed his safety to his prudence. Ah, The public. A multitude of assassins that hankers for a man's death as if they alone made good use of life and had a family. His departure from the plaza was sad. Behind the crowd that filled the environs of the ring, the carriages, the automobiles, the long rows of tramcars. His coach rolled along slowly to avoid driving over the groups of spectators coming out of the plaza. These separated to let the mules pass, but as they recognized the swordsman they seemed to repent their amiability. In the movement of their lips Gallardo read tremendous insults. Other carriages in which rode handsome women in white mantillas passed near his. Some turned their heads so as not to see the bullfighter, others looked on him with eyes of pitying commiseration. The matador shrank as if he wished to pass unnoticed. He hid behind the corpulence of National who rode silent and frowning. A crowd of boys following the carriage broke out into hisses. Many who were standing on the sidewalks imitated them, thinking thus to avenge themselves for their poverty, which had compelled them to remain outside the plaza the whole afternoon in a vain hope of seeing something. The news of Gallardo's failure had circulated among them and they insulted him, glad to humiliate a man who earned enormous riches. This outburst aroused the swordsman from the mute resignation into which he had fallen. Curse it! But why do they hiss? Have they been at the bullfight? Have they paid out their money? A stone struck against a wheel of the coach. The vagabonds were shouting at the very steps, but two guards rode up on horseback and quelled the disturbance, afterward escorting all the way up Alcala Street the famous Juan Gallardo, the greatest man in the world. Chapter 17. The Atonement of Blood. The quadrillas had just entered the ring when loud blows were heard on the door of the caballerizers. A plaza employee approached it shouting with ill humor. Nobody entered there, they must go to another door. But an insistent voice answered him from without, and he opened it. A man and a woman entered, he wearing a white cordovan hat, she dressed in black and with a mantle over her head. The man grasped the employee's hand, leaving something in it that humanized his fierce aspect. "You know me, don't you?" said the newcomer. "Really, don't you know me? I am Gallardo's brother-in-law and this lady is his wife." Carmen gazed all around the abandoned courtyard. In the distance, behind the thick brick walls, sounded music, and the respiration of the multitude could be felt, broken by shouts of enthusiasm and murmurs of curiosity. The quadrillas were defiling before the president. "Where is he?" anxiously inquired Carmen. "Where should he be, woman?" replied the brother-in-law brusquely. "In the plaza, doing his duty." "It is madness to have come, it's nonsense." "Oh, this weak character of mine." Carmen continued gazing about her, but with a certain indecision, as if repentant for having come there. What was she to do? The employee, moved by Antonio's hand pressure, or by the relationship of those two persons to the matador of fame, became obsequious. If the lady wished to await the termination of the bullfight, she might rest at the concierge's house. If they chose to see the corrida, he could get them a good place, although they had no tickets. Carmen shuddered at this proposition. See the bullfight? No. She had come to the plaza by an effort of her will, and she regretted it. It was impossible for her to endure the sight of her husband in the ring. She had never seen him fighting bulls. She would wait there until she could bear it no longer. God help me, said the leather worker with resignation. We will stay, though I don't know what we shall do here in front of the stables. Encarnation's husband had been following after his sister-in-law since the day before, putting up with her hysteria and tears of nervousness excited by fear. Saturday at midday Carmen had talked to him in her husband's office. She was going to Madrid. She was determined on taking this journey. She could not live in Seville. She had spent a week of insomnia, seeing horrible visions. Her feminine instinct warned her of some great danger. She must rush to Juan's side. She did not know why, nor what she could accomplish by the journey, but she longed to be near Gallardo, with that affectionate desire that believes it can minimize danger by being close to the person beloved. This was not living. She had learned through the daily papers about Juan's bad luck the Sunday before in the Plaza of Madrid. She understood bullfighter professional pride. She guessed that he would not tolerate this misfortune with resignation. He would do mad deeds to reconquer the applause of the public. The last letter she had received from him gave her to understand it vaguely. Yes, she said energetically to her brother-in-law, I am going to Madrid this very afternoon. If thou wishest, thou mayest accompany me. If thou dost not wish to come, I will go alone. Above all, not a word to Don Jose, he would prevent the trip. No one knows about it but Mamita. The leather worker accepted. A free trip to Madrid, although in such sad company. On the way, Carmen gave expression to her fears. She would talk to her husband forcefully. Why continue fighting bulls? Had they not enough to live on? He must retire, and immediately, if not, she would die. This corrida must be the last. Even this one seemed more than she could bear. She would arrive in Madrid in time to prevent her husband working that afternoon. Her heart told her that by her presence she would prevent a great calamity. But her brother-in-law protested in consternation on hearing this. What barbarity! What women are! They get an idea in the head, and things must be so. Dost thou believe, then, that there is no authority, nor laws, nor rules of the plaza, and that it is enough for a woman to take a notion to embrace her husband when she gets frightened, to suspend a corrida and leave the public with its thumb on its nose? Thou mayst say what thou wilt to Juan, but it must be after the bullfight. Authority can't be played with, we would all go to jail. The leather worker imagined the most dramatic consequences if Carmen persisted in her absurd idea of presenting herself to her husband in order to prevent his bullfighting. They would all be locked up. He already saw himself in prison as an accomplice to this act which, in his simplicity, he considered a crime. When they reached Madrid, he had to make renewed efforts to prevent his companion from rushing to the hotel where her husband was. What good would that do? Thou wilt confuse him by thy presence and he will go to the plaza in a bad humor, excited, and if anything happens to him the fault will be thine. This idea subdued Carmen and caused her to follow her brother-in-law's advice. She allowed herself to be taken to a hotel of his selection, and she remained there all the morning lying on a sofa in her room, weeping as if she were sure of coming adversity. The leather worker, happy to be in Madrid, well housed, waxed indignant against this despair which seemed to him absurd. Man alive! What women are! Any one would think thou art a widow, while thy husband is at this very moment getting ready for the corrida, hale and hearty as Roger de Flor himself. What nonsense! Carmen scarcely ate any breakfast, deaf to the praises her brother-in-law rendered the cook of the establishment. In the afternoon her resignation vanished again. The hotel was situated near the Puerta del Sol and the noise and stir of the people going to the bullfight reached her. No, she could not stay in that strange room while her husband risked his life. She must see him. She lacked courage to witness the spectacle, but she longed to be near him. She must go to the plaza. Where was the plaza? She had never seen it. If she could not enter, she would wander around its environs. The important thing was to feel herself near, believing that by this proximity she could influence Gallardo's luck. The leather worker protested. By the life of! He intended to see the bullfight, He had gone out and bought a ticket, and now Carmen spoiled his pleasure by her determination to go to the plaza. But what wilt thou do there, girl? What wilt thou better by thy presence? Imagine if Junio should chance to see thee. They argued long, but the woman answered all his reasoning with the same firm reply. Thou needst not accompany me, I will go alone. The brother-in-law at last surrendered, and they rode to the plaza in a hired coach. The leatherworker remembered a great deal about the amphitheater and its dependencies from having accompanied Gallardo on one of his trips to Madrid for the spring bullfights. He and the employee were undecided and ill-humored in the presence of this woman with red-stained eyes and sunken cheeks who stood planted in the courtyard uncertain what to do. The two men felt themselves drawn by the murmur of the crowd and the music that rose from the plaza. Must they stand there the whole afternoon and not see the bullfight? The employee had a brilliant inspiration. If the lady wished to pass into the chapel, the defiling of the quadrillas was over. Some horsemen came trotting out of the door that gave access to the ring. They were picados who were not on duty and were retiring from the arena to substitute their companions when their turn came. Hitched to some rings in the wall stood a row of 6 saddled horses, the first that must enter the plaza to supply those fallen. Behind them the lancers passed the time making evolutions with their steeds. A stable boy mounted a skittish wild mare and galloped her along the corral to tire her, and then turned her over to the picaros. The hacks, tortured by the flies, stamped their feet, pulling on the rings as if they divined the coming danger. The other horses trotted, urged on by the riders' spurs. Carmen and her brother-in-law had to take refuge under the arcades, and finally the bullfighter's wife accepted the invitation to pass into the chapel. It was a safe and tranquil place, and there she could do something useful for her husband. When she entered the sacred room with its atmosphere made dense by the respiration of the public that had witnessed the bullfighter's prayers, Carmen gazed upon the poverty of the altar. 4 lights were burning before the Virgin of the Dove, but this tribute seemed niggardly to her. She opened her purse to give a duro to an employee. Could he not bring more tapers? The man scratched his head. Tapers? Tapers? He did not believe he could find any among the chattels belonging to the plaza. But he suddenly recalled to mind the sisters of a matador who brought candles whenever he fought bulls. Maybe they were not all gone, and there might be a few in some corner of the chapel. After a long search he found them. There were no candlesticks, but the employee, a man of resources, brought a couple of empty bottles, and sticking the candles into their necks, he lit them and placed them near the other lights. Carmen had knelt, and the 2 men took advantage of her immobility to rush to the plaza, eager to witness the first events of the corrida. The woman remained lost in contemplation of the crude image reddened by the lights. She was not familiar with this virgin, but she must be sweet and kind like the one in Seville to whom she had so often made supplication. Moreover, she was the virgin of the bullfighters. She heard their last prayers when danger near at hand gave sincere piety to those rough men. On that floor her husband had knelt many times. And this thought was enough to cause her to feel attracted to the image and to contemplate her with religious trust, as if she had known her since childhood. Her lips moved, repeating the supplications with automatic haste, but her thoughts fled away from prayer, as if drawn by the noises of the multitude that reached her. Oh! That intermittent volcano-like billowing, that roar of distant waves, broken from time to time by pauses of tragic silence. Carmen imagined herself witnessing the invisible bullfight. She divined by the variations in the sounds from the plaza the progress of the tragedy that was taking place within the ring. Sometimes there was an explosion of angry shouts with accompaniment of hisses, again thousands and thousands of voices uttered unintelligible words. Suddenly rose a shriek of terror, prolonged, shrill, that seemed to rise to heaven, a fearful and halting exclamation that brought to mind thousands of heads in a row, blanched by emotion, following the swift race of a bull in pursuit of a man, until it was suddenly broken by a shout, re-establishing calm. The danger had passed. There were long intervals of silence, a silence absolute, the silence of the void, in which the buzzing of the flies hovering around the horses was magnified, as though the immense amphitheatre were deserted, as though the 14,000 persons seated on its surrounding seats had become motionless and breathless, and Carmen were the only living being that existed within its heart. Suddenly this silence was animated by a loud and indescribable shock, as though every brick in the plaza were loosened from its place and all were dashing against one another. It was the prolonged applause that made the ring tremble. In the nearby courtyard sounded blows of the rod on the hide of the wretched horses, blasphemy, clatter of hoofs, and voices. Whose turn? New lancers were called into the plaza. To these noises others nearer were added. Footsteps sounded in the adjoining rooms, doors opened suddenly, voices and labored breathing of several men were heard, as if they walked burdened by great weight. It is nothing, a bruise. Thou art not bleeding. Before the corrida is over thou'lt be lancing again. A hoarse voice, weakened by pain, groaned between gasps with an accent that reminded Carmen of home. Virgin of solitude. I must have broken something. Look well, doctor. Alas, my children. Carmen shuddered with horror. She raised her eyes that had wandered in fear to the Virgin. Her nose seemed drawn out by her emotion to a sharp point between sunken and pallid cheeks. She felt sick. She feared that she would fall to the floor in a faint from terror. She tried to pray again, to isolate herself in prayer, to not hear the noises from without, transmitted through the walls with a tone of despair. But in spite of her a dismal sound reached her ear of sponges being wet in water and voices of men who must be doctors and nurses stimulating the picador, who complained with the energy of a mountaineer, at the same time striving to hide the pain of his broken bones through manly pride. Virgin of solitude. My children. What will the poor babes have to eat if their father cannot use the lands? Carmen arose. She could bear no more. She would fall fainting if she remained in that gloomy place trembling at the echoes of pain. She thought she felt in her own bones the same torture that caused that unknown man to groan. She went out into the courtyard. Blood on all sides, blood on the floor and around some casks where water mingled with the red fluid. The picados were retiring from the ring. The sign for the display of the banderillas had been given, and the riders came out on their bleeding horses. They dismounted, talking with animation of the incidents of the bullfight. Carmen saw Potage let his vigorous person down off his horse, hurling a string of curses at the mono sabio who stupidly assisted him in his descent. He seemed benumbed by his hidden iron greaves and from the pain of several violent falls. He raised one hand to his back to ease himself with painful stretches, but he smiled, showing his yellow horse-like teeth. Have ye seen how well one does today? He said to those who surrounded him. Today he surely is all right. Seeing a solitary woman in the courtyard, and recognizing her, he showed no surprise. You here, Sena, Carmen? How good. He spoke tranquilly, as if he, in the stupor which wine and his own bestiality kept him, could not be surprised by anything in the world. Have you seen Juan? He continued. He laid down on the ground before the bull, under his very nose. Nobody else can do what that fellow does. Peep in and see him, for he is very fine today. Someone called him from the door of the infirmary. His companion, the picador, wanted to speak to him before being taken to the hospital. Adio, Sena, Carmen. I must see what that poor fellow wants. A fall with a fracture, they say. He won't use the lands again this whole season. Carmen took refuge under the arcades and closed her eyes to the repugnant spectacle in the courtyard, yet at the same time fascinated by the sickening sight of the blood. The Monos Sabios led in the wounded horses by the bridle reins. A stable boy, seeing them, began to bestir himself, in a fever of activity. "Courage, brave boys," he shouted, addressing the youths with the horses. "Firm! Firm there!" A stable boy carefully approached a horse that was struggling in pain, took off his saddle, fastened leather straps around his legs, binding the four extremities, and threw the animal to the ground. "There, there! Firm! Firm with him," the one in charge of the horses continued shouting, without ceasing his activity. Another held the reins of the fallen animal and pressed his poor head against the ground by placing his foot on it. The nose contracted with distortions of pain, the long yellow teeth gritted with a chill of martyrdom, his stifled whinnies lost in the dust from the pressure of the foot. The gory hands of the others worked to return the flaccid entrails to the open cavity of the abdomen or stuffed it with handfuls of tow, while still others, with a skill acquired by practice, sewed up the hide. When the horse was fixed, with barbaric promptness, they threw a bucket of water over his head, loosed his feet from the straps and gave him several blows with a rod to make him stand up. Some, after walking barely 2 steps, fell flat, shedding a stream of blood from the wound stitched with packthread. It was instantaneous death. Others were kept alive by some marvelous resource of animal vigor, and the lackeys, after this fixing, took them to the varnishing, inundating their feet and bellies with strong ablutions from casks of water. The white or chestnut color of the animals became glossy and the hair dripped a rose-colored liquid, a mixture of water and blood. The horses were patched up as if they were old shoes, and their waning strength was exploited to the last breath, prolonging their agony and death. The important thing was to keep these animals on their feet a few minutes longer, until the picadors could get into the plaza again. The bull would take charge of finishing the work. Carmen wished to go. Virgin of Hope! What was she doing there? She did not know the order the matadors were to follow in their work. Maybe that last trumpet blast signaled the moment in which her husband would stand before the wild beast. And she there, a few steps from him, and not seeing him. She wished to escape, to free herself from this torment. Moreover, the blood that ran through the courtyard, and the torment of those poor beasts, caused her the greatest anguish. Her womanly delicacy rebelled against these tortures, while she held her handkerchief to her nostrils to stifle the slaughterhouse odors. She had never been to a bullfight. A great part of her existence had been spent hearing conversation about bulls, but in the tales of these sports she saw only the external, what all the world saw, the events in the ring, in the light of the sun, with glitter of silks and embroideries and the ostentatious spectacle, without realizing the odious preparations that took place in the mystery of the wings. And they lived off this sport, with its repugnant martyrdom of guiltless animals, and their fortune had been made at the cost of such spectacles. A loud applause broke out within the ring. Orders were issued in the courtyard with imperious voice. The first bull had just died. The barricade at the end of the passage that communicated with the ring was opened, and the noises of the multitude and the echoes of the music were borne in with more intensity. The mules were in the plaza, one team to collect the dead horses, another to drag out the bull's carcass. Carmen saw her brother-in-law coming along the arcades. He was still tremulous with enthusiasm over what he had seen. One, colossal. This afternoon as he never was before. Fear not. Why, that boy eats the bulls up alive. Then he glanced at her uneasily, fearful that she would make him lose so interesting an afternoon. What did she decide? Did she think she had the courage to peep into the plaza? Take me away, she said with an agonized accent. Get me out of here quickly. I am sick. Leave me in the first church we can find. The leather worker made a worry face. By the life of Roger. Leave such a magnificent bullfight. And as they walked toward the door, he was calculating where he could abandon Carmen so as to immediately return to the plaza. When the second bull came in, Gallardo, still leaning against the barrier, was receiving felicitations from his admirers. What courage that boy had, when he wished. The whole plaza had applauded the first bull, forgetting their anger at the former corridas. When a picador fell and lay senseless from the terrible shock, Gallardo had rushed up with his cape, drawing the wild beast into the center of the ring. He made some bold Veronicas that at last held the bull motionless and exhausted, after turning from the lure of the red rag. The bullfighter, taking advantage of the animal's stupefaction, stood erect within a few steps of his muzzle, thrusting his body forward as if in challenge. He felt the heart throbbing, that happy precursor of his great daring. He must conquer the public with a dash of audacity, and he knelt before the horns with a certain precaution, ready to arise at the slightest sign of charging. The bull stood quiet. Gallardo reached out a hand until he touched the driveling muzzle, and the animal made no movement whatever. Then he dared something that held the public in palpitating silence. Slowly he laid himself down on the sand, with the cape between his arms serving as a pillow, and thus he remained some seconds lying beneath the nose of the bull, who sniffed him with a kind of fear, as if he suspected danger in this body that audaciously placed itself beneath his horns. When the bull, recovering his aggressive fierceness, lowered his horns, the bullfighter rolled toward his feet, in this way putting himself out of his reach, and the animal passed over him, vainly seeking in his ferocious blindness the bulk that attacked him. Gallardo rose brushing off the dust, and the public, which adored feats of daring, applauded him with the old-time enthusiasm. It hailed not alone his audacity, it applauded itself, admiring its own majesty, guessing that the bullfighter's daring was to reconcile himself with it, to regain its affection. Gallardo came to the corrida disposed to the most daring deeds to reconquer applause. He is careless, they said on the tiers of seats, often he is slack, but he has bullfighter pride and he is going to redeem his name. But the enthusiasm of the public, their gay excitement over Gallardo's achievement, and the true sword thrust with which the other matador had killed the first bull, turned to ill humor and protest as they saw the second in the ring. He was enormous and of beautiful build, but he ran through the center of the arena looking with surprise at the noisy multitude on the bleachers, frightened at the voices and hisses that were meant to excite him, fleeing from his own shadow, as if he divined all kinds of intrigue. The peons ran, waving the cape at him. He charged at the red rag, following it some instants, but suddenly he gave a snort of surprise and, turning his hindquarters, fled in the opposite direction with violent springs. His eagerness for flight infuriated the public. "That's no bull, it's a monkey." The swordsman's capes finally managed to attract it toward the barrier, where the picadors waited motionless on their mounts, with lance under arm. He approached a rider with lowered head and with fierce snorts as if to charge. But before the iron could be lodged in his neck, he gave a spring and ran, passing through the capes the peons waved at him. In his flight he met another lancer and repeated the springing, the snorting and the flight. Then he met the third horseman, who, thrusting forward his lance, speared him in the neck, by this punishment only augmenting his fear and his speed. The public had risen to its feet en masse, gesticulating and shouting. "A tame bull! What an abomination!" Everyone turned toward the president roaring his protest. "Senor President! That could not be allowed." A chorus of voices that repeated the same words with monotonous intonation began to rise from some sections. "Fire! Fire!" The president seemed to hesitate. The bull was running, followed by the combatants, who chased after him, their capes over their arms. When any of these managed to head him off, or to stop him, he smelt the cloth with the usual snort and ran in a different direction, jumping and kicking. The noisy protest against these flights increased. Senor President. Was his lordship deaf? Bottles, oranges, and seat cushions began to fall into the ring around the fugitive animal. The public hated it for its cowardice. One bottle struck on one of the horns and the people applauded this true shot though not knowing who it was. Many of the audience leaned forward as if about to throw themselves into the ring to destroy the bad beast with their hands. What a scandal! To see in the plaza of Madrid oxen that were only fit for meat. Fire! Fire! At last the president waved a red handkerchief and a salvo of applause greeted this signal. The fire banderillas were an extraordinary sight, something unexpected, that augmented the interest of the corrida. Many who had protested until they were hoarse felt inward satisfaction at this incident. They were going to see the bull roasted alive, running mad with terror at the fire streams that would be hanging from his neck. National advanced carrying, hanging from his hands, with the points downward, to thick banderillas that seemed to be encased in black paper. He went toward the bull without great precaution, as if his cowardice merited no art whatever, and he lodged the infernal barbs to the accompaniment of the vengeful applause of the multitude. There was a crackling sound as if something broke and two spirals of white smoke began to blaze on the animal's neck. In the light of the sun the fire could not be seen, but the hair singed and disappeared and a black mark extended around the neck. The bull ran, surprised at the attack, accelerating his flight as though thus to free himself from torment, until suddenly detonations like gunshots began to burst on his neck, the burning embers of paper flying around his eyes. The animal sprang aloft, filled with terror, his 4 feet in the air at once, vainly twisting his horned head to pull out with his mouth those demons clutched upon his neck. The people laughed and applauded, thinking his springs and contortions funny. It seemed as if, with his strong heavy body, he were executing a trained animal's dance. "How they sting him!" they exclaimed, with ferocious laughter. The banderilla ceased crackling and bursting. His carbonized neck was covered with blisters of fat. The bull, no longer feeling the burning of the fire, stood motionless, breathing hard, his head lowered, thrusting out his dry dark red tongue. Another banderillero approached him and put in a second pair. The smoke spirals rose again above the charred flesh, the shots resounded and the bull ran madly, trying to reach his neck with his mouth by twisting his massive body, but now his movements were less violent, as though the vigorous animal began to habituate itself to martyrdom. Still a third pair was lodged, and his neck became carbonized, shading through the ring a nauseating odor of melted grease, burnt hide, and hair consumed by fire. The public continued applauding with vengeful frenzy, as though the gentle animal were an adversary of their beliefs and they did a pious deed in burning him. They laughed when they saw him tremulous on his legs, moving his flanks like the sides of a billows, lowing with a shrieking howl of pain, his eyes reddened, and dragging his tongue over the sand, greedy for a sensation of coolness. Gallardo, leaning against the barrier, near the president's box, awaited the sign to kill. Garbato had the sword and muleta ready on the edge of the wall. Curse it! The bullfight had begun so well, and for bad luck to reserve this bull for him, the one he himself had chosen on account of its fine appearance, but which now that it trod the arena turned out to be tame. He excused himself in advance for defective work, talking with the intelligent who occupied seats near the barrier. "What can be done will be done, and no more," he said, shrugging his shoulders. Then he turned toward the boxes, gazing at Dona Sols. She had applauded him before, when he achieved his stupendous feat of lying down before the bull. Her gloved hands clapped with enthusiasm when he turned toward the barrier, bowing to the public. When Dona Sol saw that the bullfighter was looking at her, she bowed to him with an affectionate manner, and even her companion, despicable fool, had joined this salutation with a stiff inclination of the body as if he were going to break off at the waist. Afterward he had several times surprised her glasses directed persistently at him, seeking him out in his retirement between barriers. That Gachi! Perhaps she felt reattracted to him. Gallardo decided to call on her next day, to see if the wind had changed. The signal to kill was given and the swordsman, after a short speech, strode up to the animal. His admirers shouted advice. "Dispatch him quick. He is an ox that deserves nothing." The bullfighter held his muleta before the animal, which charged, but with a slow step made cautious by torture, with a manifest intention of crushing, of wounding, as if martyrdom had awakened all his ferocity. That man was the first object which had placed itself before his horns since the torture. The multitude felt its vengeful animosity against the bull vanish. He did not recover himself badly, he charged. Ole! And all hailed the Pas de Muleta with enthusiasm, including combatant and wild beast in common approbation. The bull stood motionless, lowering his head, with his tongue protruding. Silence, the forerunner of the mortal thrust, fell, a silence greater than that of absolute solitude, product of many thousands of bated breaths, silence so intense that the faintest sound in the ring carried to the most distant seats. All heard a slight clashing of sticks striking against each other. It was the sound made when Gallardo with the point of his sword laid back over the bull's neck the charred shafts of the banderillas that rested between the horns. After this arrangement to facilitate the blow, the multitude thrust their heads still farther forward, responsive to the mysterious correspondence that had just been established between its will and that of the matador. Now, he was going to fell the bull with a masterful stroke. All divined the swordsman's resolution. Gallardo threw himself upon the bull and the whole audience breathed hard in unison after the nerve-straining pause. The animal drew away from the encounter, running, bellowing with fury, while the rows of seats burst out into hisses and protests. As usual, Gallardo had turned away his face and bent his arm at the moment of killing. The animal bore in his neck the loose and wavering sword, and after taking a few steps the steel blade sprang out of the flesh and rolled on the sand. Part of the public rebuked Gallardo. The charm that had united the swordsman to the multitude at the beginning of the feast was broken. Lack of confidence reappeared, criticism of the bullfighter spread. All seemed to have forgotten the enthusiasm of a short time before. Gallardo recovered his sword and with bowed head, lacking spirit to protest at the ingratitude of a multitude tolerant to others, inflexible with him, strode up to the bull again. In his confusion he thought he saw a bullfighter place himself at his side. It must be national. Be calm, Juan. Don't get rattled. Damn it! Must the same thing always happen to him? Could he no longer thrust his arm between the horns, as in other times, burying the sword to the hilt? Was he to spend the rest of his life making audiences laugh? An ox which they had had to set on fire. He placed himself before the animal, which seemed to await him, his legs motionless as if he wished to put an end immediately to his long torture. He would not make more passes with the muleta. He squared himself, the red rag held near the ground, the sword horizontal at the height of his eyes. Now for the stroke. The audience rose to its feet with a sudden impulse. For some seconds man and beast formed but a single mass and thus moved a few steps. The most intelligent raised their hands ready to applaud. He had thrown himself to kill as in his better days. A master stroke. But suddenly the man emerged from between the horns, hurled like a projectile by a powerful toss of the bull's head, and rolled along the sand. The bull lowered his head and his horns hooked up the body, raising it from the ground an instant and letting it fall, to continue on his race, bearing in his neck the blade of the sword, embedded to the cross. Gallardo slowly raised himself and the plaza burst forth into a deafening applause, eager to repair its injustice. Hurrah! Good for the bullfighter of Seville. He had done well. But the bullfighter did not respond to these exclamations of enthusiasm. He put his hands on his abdomen, bent over in an attitude of pain, and took a few hesitating steps with lowered head. Twice he raised it and looked toward the door of exit, as if he feared he could not find it, staggering blindly as though intoxicated. Suddenly he fell upon the sand, contracted like an enormous worm of silk and gold. 4 mozos of the plaza slowly lifted him up until they raised him on their shoulders. National joined the group holding the swordsman's ghastly head with its glassy eyes showing through their half-closed lashes. The public made a movement of surprise, ceasing their applause. Everyone gazed about, undecided as to the gravity of the event. But suddenly optimistic news circulated, coming from no one knew where, that anonymous opinion, which all heed and which at certain moments fires a multitude or causes it to remain motionless. It was nothing. A wound in the abdomen that deprived him of his senses. No one had seen blood. The crowd, suddenly tranquilized, began to be seated again, turning its attention from the wounded bullfighter to the wild beast, which was still on its feet, resisting the agonies of death. National helped to place his maestro on a bed in the infirmary. He fell on it like a sack, inanimate, his arms hanging outside the couch. Sebastian, though he had often seen his maestro wounded and bleeding, and had kept his serenity in spite of it, now felt an agony of fear, seeing him inert and of a greenish-white color, as if he were dead. "By the life of the blue dove," he moaned. "Are there no doctors? Is there nobody here?" The man in charge of the hospital, after sending away the mangled picador, had rushed back to his box in the plaza. The banderillero was in despair, the seconds seemed hours, he screamed to Garbato and to Potage who had followed after him, not sure what he was trying to tell them. 2 doctors came and after closing the door so that no one could disturb them, they stood undecided before the swordsman's inanimate body. He must be undressed. Garbato began to unbutton, rip, and tear the bullfighter's clothing, by the light that entered through a window in the ceiling. National could hardly see the body. The doctors stood around the wounded man, consulting each other with significant glances. It must be a collapse that had apparently deprived him of life. No blood was seen. The rents in his clothing were the effect, no doubt, of the tumbling the bull had given him. Dr. Ruiz entered hastily and his colleagues made way for him, respecting his skill. He swore in his nervous precipitation while he began to assist Garbato to open the bullfighter's clothing. There was a movement of astonishment, of painful surprise, around the bed. The banderillero dared not inquire. He looked between the heads of the doctors and saw Gallardo's body with the shirt raised above his breast. The naked abdomen was gashed by a tortuous aperture like bleeding lips, through which appeared patches of bright blue. Dr. Ruiz sadly shook his head. Besides the atrocious and incurable wound, the bullfighter had received a tremendous shock from the bull's tossing. He did not breathe. "Doctor, doctor," cried the banderillero, begging to know the truth. Dr. Ruiz, after a long silence, shook his head again. "It is all over, Sebastian. Thou must seek another matador." National raised his eyes aloft. Thus to end a man like that, unable to press the hand of his friends, without a word, suddenly, like a miserable rabbit struck in the neck. In despair he left the infirmary. Ah, he could not see that. He was not like Pottage, who stood quiet and frowning at the foot of the bed, contemplating the body as though he did not see it, while he twirled his beaver hat in his fingers. He was about to cry like a child. His breast heaved with anguish, and his eyes filled with tears. He had to make way through the courtyard to give passage to the picadors who were entering the ring again. The terrible news began to circulate through the plaza. Gallardo was dead. Some doubted the truth of the information, others accepted it, still no one moved from his seat. The third bull was soon to come in. The corrida had not yet reached its first half, and there was no reason for abandoning it. Through the door of the ring came the murmur of the multitude and the sound of music. The banderillero felt a fierce hatred born within him for all that surrounded him, an aversion to his profession and to the public that supported it. In his memory danced the sonorous words with which he had made the people laugh, finding in them now a new expression of justice. He thought of the bull which was at that moment being dragged out of the arena, its neck burned and blood-stained, its legs rigid, and its glassy eyes staring at blue space as do those of the dead. Then in imagination he saw the friend who lay but a few steps away from him on the other side of a brick wall, also motionless and stiff, his breast bare, his abdomen torn open, a glazed and mysterious brilliancy between his half-closed lashes. Poor bull! Poor matador! Suddenly the murmuring amphitheatre burst forth into a bellowing, hailing the continuation of the spectacle. National closed his eyes and clenched his fists. It was the bellowing of the wild beast, the real and only one.